This is a state that boomed and grew at the time the middle class in the post-war environment became the dominant social milieu of America. And that's us. We are the suburbs, we are the middle class, we are the soccer moms, we are people who participate on a very level playing field.
As we speak here today, there are thousands of people coming here with the same dreams, with the same ambitions. And those folks change this place and change the values and the direction of this place. And it's still a city that's in its adolescence, and it's going through huge growing pains.
My name is Roseanne Russo. I am 78 years old. I am from Omaha, Nebraska, and my motto is move it or lose it. And this is my daughter.
I'm Joan from Colorado, Mississippi, Linda from Idaho, southeastern Iowa, Edna from Texas.
I'm from Wisconsin. My sister and I, 2 horses, 3 cats, and a dog, moved out here. It took us 5 days to get here.
Traveling around the country, and I ran out of money. I got here with 38 cents and a half a tank of gas in 1976.
To build a city in the desert is to create an oasis. An oasis of water, homes, roads, people, ideas. Millions of people have been drawn to this place. In fact, if success were measured simply by growth, this would be one of the most successful cities in history. Now, the hub of the Southwest, Phoenix is the nation's 6th largest city, a metropolis of millions. But because of this incredible growth, it is also a place in conflict. Development in Phoenix has revealed a fundamental paradox in the American dream. We don't necessarily get what we want as a community when we pursue what we want as individuals. Where we live now may no longer resemble the place we once knew. It may no longer make sense.
Okay, let's build a snowman!
There you go, buddy. $2. Thank you.
I'm very, very interested in Phoenix as a late manifestation of a desert city, and it's caused me to think very hard about desert cities throughout history. And in fact, you could almost say that the concept of civilization starts in desert cities. It's the creation of cities in deserts, particularly in the Tigris and Euphrates area of Mesopotamia, that initiates the whole idea of civilization.
Phoenix isn't just any desert city. This arid laboratory is a place where things happen fast and on a large scale. It is now a metropolis composed of 25 separate expanding cities, a place where it can take more than 2 hours to drive from one end to the other. Looking at Phoenix offers us a window onto difficult conflicts that many cities face today. Open space versus development. Land use driven by market forces versus land use shaped by planning. The individual's interests versus the community's interests. The quality of our lives is often determined by how we resolve these conflicts, by how we value land, how we use and occupy it. To better understand this, we begin with a story of Phoenix that began not so long ago.
I'm Chet Huntley. The story of winning the great American West has been essentially a story of its dams. For without water, controlled and in abundance, few of the cities, farms, industries, and recreational facilities which have made the West the El Dorado of our day would have been possible.
What made it possible to live here is bold and courageous public policy positions. I mean, there were people who were prepared to build dams and bring water from central Arizona and northern Arizona to Phoenix and move water around in huge amounts. If you think about it in historic terms, it's audacious, it's outrageous to want to live here. This is a very hostile place.
Would somebody 100 years ago have imagined that this would be one of the major communities in the country, the 6th or 7th largest? And the answer is unquestionably no. I mean, they would have been immediately told they were crazy and sent to an institution if they'd said, this is the site of a great city in the future. And it's so imponderable. I mean, this is not a port. It is not a crossroads of industry. It is not a place where there are major resources.
My husband is the type that in Illinois, September came, he'd like start getting this long face. You know, I was more like the nester. I'd get the blankets out, the sweaters, you know, whatever. And he would just like get totally depressed, you know, and he saw that there could be a place. I mean, one year we came out here on a visit and had Thanksgiving on the patio.
Growth in Phoenix is being driven by employment, and people are choosing to locate in Phoenix and bring their businesses here.
It's that energy, I think, more than anything else that attracts people here. It's certainly the extraordinary beauty. It's certainly the open space, but it's economic opportunity. And that's fueled by this spirit that you can make it here, that attracts people here.
Driven by land, money, jobs, and dreams, this place is the perfect growth machine. The city of Phoenix is larger than Paris, Rome, San Francisco, and Manhattan combined, and the region is still growing. Planners anticipate over the next 10 years, the population will increase by another 1 million.
The population of this area right now is 0, and we'll be, in the next 3 to 5 years, raising that population to 20 to 25,000 people. There will be a development that includes 2 large box stores, supermarket, over 2,600 single-family homes. We have pools that are going in. That'll all be happening in the next 3 to 5 years.
There are other areas in the country that are growing relatively rapidly, but we're into what I would describe as hypergrowth. When you talk about adding at least 100,000 people every year to the region, it's tremendous.
I moved in 93, January of 93, I moved to Queen Creek. And we were about 2,000 at that point in time. We're now about 5,000. By 2010, we should be 30,000. By 2015, around 60,000. And by 2020, we should be closer to 100,000, 80 to 100,000.
Urban areas usually grow 2 ways, up or out. Many cities are naturally hemmed in by rivers, mountains, or oceans, forcing them to grow upward from a dwindling base of available land. But Phoenix has sprawled easily into the desert, maneuvering around nature's barriers. Land on the fringe is cheaper, so that's where development takes place. Developers acquire large tracts of land. The homes get built after they have been bought by customers.
Es mi sueño. Tenemos 3 años aquí en Estados Unidos y era mi sueño tener una casa nueva. Sí.
Yeah, we came from Mexico 3 years ago, and that was her dream. get a house here.
21 miles west of downtown Phoenix is Avondale. Here, inexpensive production homes are built in about 4 months.
Look, we're here. Oh, they already put down the concrete foundation.
I mean, the first time she was here, she got home and she's like, "Oh, I found this house. It's beautiful. I love it. I want to move there. I want a house."
Large home building conglomerates lay out endless streets, sometimes enclosed by gates, usually walled in from the desert, always with a garage and central air.
That's the first thing she mentioned. It's like an apartment complex, but you have your own house. You have the pool, you have access to the golf course or whatever, and she liked it.
There's a history of people coming here because of its climate and affordability. Before World War II, Phoenix was mostly a quiet agricultural community. Lots of sun, but painfully hot. After the war, air conditioning arrived in a big way, and Phoenix became a mecca for a huge market of winter visitors. Homebuilder John F. Long was ready for them. He built Maryvale, the first development to incorporate churches, schools, and shopping centers as part of a subdivision plan. And then Phoenix developer Del Webb greeted them with a concept that would change this region forever.
Sun City is a separate community just a few miles beyond the Phoenix.
Sun City was opened on New Year's Day, 1960, as one of the first planned communities in Arizona, catering to the desires of retirees.
Handsome streets. I saw hundreds of attractive, well-groomed homes.
We traveled for 4.5 years looking for a place to retire and live after my husband was through with his work. And this offered more than any place that we saw in the whole country for active retirement and companionship.
But the realization of any dream must be based on sound planning. And to be sure that this community would really be exactly what its future residents wanted, he began a
The product of extensive research, Sun City set out to fill a market niche, reasonably priced housing within a completely fabricated retirement community, with every aspect designed for easy living. In order to make his development profitable, Webb built on inexpensive land, 20 miles from downtown. Half a century later, the same company that built Sun City has updated its planned community, designing it for families, not just retirees. Once again, cheap land has made the vision possible. This time, it is located almost 35 miles from downtown Phoenix, where the edge of development has pushed the fringe.
Welcome to Anthem. This is Del Webb's new family community.
Well, it's nice to have you here at Anthem today, and we're really excited to show you some of our homes and opportunities. What kind of home are you thinking of?
Building on virgin desert, developers have created an alternative for homebuyers. They've pre-engineered new communities based on extensive market research, fulfilling the buyer's desire for a lifestyle of convenience, recreation, and affordability. Manufacturing a sense of place by defining it as resort-style desert living.
We came from Detroit, Michigan, and we have a 9-year-old daughter. So we were looking for a community that we could live in, that she would be safe, that had a lot of activities, and that, offered a lot for her and as well as family.
For most people, they move to an area and they have to set about defining their own sense of place. They find their favorite store and they find their favorite movie theater. But here at Anthem, in a sense, in a way, that sense is already defined for you.
It was if they went to me and said, Lawrence, if you wanted to live in an ideal community, what would you look for?
What we do know is that there are certain aspects of living that people really seem to like. They're really attracted to. Good schools, quality parks, fun things to do. In most cases, the consumer has to aggregate that lifestyle themselves.
and they have to find the place that has this, and they've got to find where the right store is, and get involved in this YMCA program, and move into this school district. They've got to do a lot of work, but we do a lot of the work for them.
We have boys, so sports is important.
The Del Webb Group isn't in the subdivision business. We build communities. We provide an enhanced piece of shelter. We're not just four walls, it's four walls plus a lifestyle.
But this lifestyle comes at a price. These 4 walls plus are built on land that lies far beyond the reach of existing utilities. Electricity and water had to be delivered across miles of desert. Thousands of acres of pristine land were cleared and developed. Golf courses became the new open space vistas. And since jobs aren't nearby, many residents have to drive more than an hour to work, clogging roads and adding new traffic congestion. Anthem, a community planned for 50,000 people, is a classic case of leapfrog development.
Anthem didn't happen because a planner said we need a new town out there. It happened through the sort of free enterprise system.
Anthem was developed as a response to what many people in Phoenix wanted. The research had predicted it, and the initial flood of buyers seemed to prove it. But not everybody was happy. Each time a new development like Anthem springs up, desert open space and habitat are lost. In addition, older communities may have to bear some of the costs of infrastructure development, like roads. The impact of new development extends far beyond its neighbors. In fact, the lure of Phoenix's fast-growth economy is reaching across the border. Gonzalo moved here from Mexico to find work in the construction industry. He gets up at 5 each morning, hoping to find work at a pickup station for day laborers.
We're part of what makes this community, work from day to day. We're part of the economic engine, that allows us to, to prosper. If you were to take away the whole Latino workforce, this community would just, stop to a halt. That there wouldn't be the services, there wouldn't be, the infrastructure would basically be eliminated.
They probably start me on $6.50 or $7. That's cheap to build like that. You build for cheap, and I'm gonna build another house, and I'm gonna build up the whole complex, and I'm gonna build big buildings because it's cheap. Because there's a lot of workers, cheap labor, and good workers too.
Gonzalo rents a trailer with 5 other workers. He lives on only $5 a day and wires home whatever else he makes to support his family in Mexico. He is part of the cycle of growth. His cheap labor helps keep development profits high, which encourages more development, feeding what seems to be unstoppable growth. The result is that the desert gets pushed farther and farther away, which raises a serious question. Is this land valued for its beauty, or is it merely a commodity with a price placed on it?
We cannot continue to, as individuals, seek out our own little haven of open space on the edge of a city, because the fact is more and more people want to do so. And so the solution of just moving further and further away from the city, driving more and more, building more roads further out, is not a long-term solution.
There is no such thing as a free market. The market is regulated right now, but it's regulated in a way that promotes sprawl development, requires a lot of the taxpayers to subsidize what's going on the fringes of the city. Now, developers will pick up the tab for some of that, but very seldom do they pick up the entire tab.
The whole question about it, whether Anthem is a good or a bad thing, is a question of balance. Are we destroying too much, or are we creating enough as we continue these patterns of development?
I think for Arizona, it's never going to end. We have perfect weather. The cost of living is a lot less in some places, so everybody wants to move here. And sooner or later, we're just going to swallow up everything that's left here. There will be no desert. There will be no mountains. I've moved twice because the first time and the second time, I moved to a place where I think I'm going to be surrounded by the desert, and before I know it, I'm just surrounded by tons of homes and traffic and everything.
We built a house out here in 1988. And we had views of the mountains, and we had wildlife coming into our yard, and you could enjoy it. You could feel this inner spirit, And in 10 years, it's gone.
More people means more traffic. Cars traveling longer distances, creating more pollution and requiring more roads. Roads which lead to new development, which brings more people, who drive more cars and create more traffic.
There are about 3 million people in the valley. We drive 66 million miles a day. We are car dependent. We drive a lot.
Well, we definitely like to build roads in the Phoenix area, and we think that freeways will address traffic congestion. But there are years and years of experiences that show that if you build more freeways, you get more traffic.
We just cannot continue to take a 4-lane freeway and change it into a 6-lane freeway and change it into a 10-lane freeway, change it into a 12-lane freeway, change it into a 14-lane. We cannot continue that forever. At the same time, as soon as that's finished, there's so much traffic that we have to consider expanding the freeway we just finished changing.
It causes us to become a society that is so dependent upon the car that we don't know our neighbors. We come out of our office, we get in our car, we drive down the street, and we hit the garage door opener, and we pull in, and that's the last we see of anybody.
I ride about 4.8 miles to work every single day. People yell at me, they're like, "Hey, loser," or "Get a car," or I got hit by 3 cars in one day. This lady was there, and she comes pulling out in a Blazer. I start pedaling, and she comes up and she whacks me. She goes, "Oh," and she got all like scared and everything, and tells me that I should watch where I'm going. It's tough town if you don't get a car. Can't get around.
Today's Phoenix is the result of a long string of environmental engineering feats that, over the years, has redefined desert life in human terms. It's all predicated on one thing.
What's transforming the desert? Water. We move water around. We bring more in, we distribute it in a different way. We control the way it moves to the extent that we're able. We just add water to the system. We're trying to create an oasis. We're trying to create something that we're comfortable with, where we want to be.
Phoenix has very little water of its own, so it gets what it needs from the Colorado River. Roughly 1/8 of the water that travels down the Colorado ends up here. The cost of this process is federally and state subsidized, making water rates here among the lowest in the country.
We have elected officials who are saying, "Oh, there's lots of water, don't worry about water, we can continue to grow," not thinking about the consequences of diverting all that water for municipal use. So I think that we are headed for real problems if we don't do something to change the way we're developing.
Today, cheap water contributes to Phoenix's ability to sprawl. But the supply isn't endless. At some point, the limits of water will impact development and the area's growth.
We're going to have to confront the realities of either stopping growth or moderating growth, or finding alternative ways to make the existing water supply go further.
Still, residents of this region use more water per capita than other comparable cities. In some older neighborhoods, residents participate in elaborate systems of water sharing that enable them to take turns flooding their lawns. Water is not a new concern. Over 2,000 years ago, there was a sophisticated civilization here called the Hohokam. They built canals to control water for irrigation. Then, suddenly, in the 15th century, the Hohokam disappeared. Some speculate that the canals dried up, or that they outgrew their ability to manage the water. People who live in the desert have always had to manage their resources wisely. Failure to do so can have catastrophic consequences.
We have many legends that speak about our ancestors who turned to stone for not behaving or not following the laws of nature. And when you abuse those laws, you must suffer the consequences despite who you are or where you're at. Well, according to the mythology, we are going to destroy ourselves by the overconsumption and overdeveloping, just overdoing everything and not saving a little bit for tomorrow.
The quality of life in Phoenix hangs in a delicate balance, a balance of limited resources that must support apparently unlimited growth. If the quality of that growth doesn't change, the region may become unrecognizable.
I mean, look at this land. It's magnificent, and it sells just like that. And if we pave over every bit of this, we have lost our history, we've lost our connection to nature, we've lost our escape from urban pressures, and we've lost our soul.
The desert is the essential magic of Phoenix. And we have the most spectacular and beautiful desert in the world.
The Sonoran Desert is the second most diverse ecosystem on Earth. We have more plant and animal species here than anywhere else on Earth except the rainforest. So that's why we talk about the developers all the time and give them such a bad time, because once they develop this little desert, it's gone and a whole ecosystem goes with it that can never be replaced and exists nowhere else.
As Phoenix grows, what was once a desert oasis is fast becoming a landscape of red-tiled roofs and shopping malls. Air quality is getting worse. Water is becoming scarcer. commute times are getting longer. This isn't the dream that people thought they were buying into.
What's happening is we don't like what it all adds up to being. And so now we're beginning to say, all right, is there a way that we can not only have what we want as individuals, but that we can have what we want collectively?
This place, like most places, is the product of millions of incremental decisions by consumers about what kind of house they want to have, by developers who are trying to deliver a product, and by government influencing that at various points in the decision-making cycle.
If a city is the product of incremental decisions made by thousands of people, how do you organize this chaos into a coherent set of goals? Goals that will shape the way decisions are made here for decades to come.
What you can do to really impact how your city develops is to try to design a process that's aimed at producing the result you want.
Bringing about change isn't easy in a region this big. Phoenix isn't just one city, it's now a patchwork of 25 municipalities. And what might be good for one isn't necessarily good for its neighbors. A shopping mall in Gilbert may cause traffic jams in adjacent Mesa, or a golf course in Scottsdale diverts water that could be going to new homes in Paradise Valley. So as the region expands, a coordinated approach to development makes sense.
We started by asking them what they saw as the major issues facing the valley in the next 5 years.
The Maricopa Association of Governments was originally founded over 35 years ago to assist cities in planning for common growth issues like waste management, water treatment, and public transportation. As the area has grown, the urgency for effective regional influence has increased, yet territorial conflicts and self-interest persist.
Well, I don't want Phoenix telling my city what roads I'm going to get, because as of yet, I've not gotten what I need. And I want to be able to see my city have a say. We may be small, but we are growing and we do contribute.
If you're a mayor of a city, you've got to look out after that city. And it's okay to say, you know, you should think regionally and you should vote in a regional context, which may become a program that's not very helpful to your city, but very helpful to some other city. You go back home to your council and your people and you say, I voted for this because it was the right thing to do, but it didn't help us, but it's going to cost us some money. That's pretty hard to do sometimes. There are more and more elected officials that are saying, not no to growth, but no to the way we're growing, and yes to a look at what our other options are, and that means, I believe, more cooperation between the cities, and we're seeing some, and ultimately some kind of an overarching planning process, and we can't do that as 24 warring communities.
So how will 24 cities agree to do anything as a group? Regional planning will only work when individual cities equate their needs with the region's needs.
What it affects my city affects all the cities surrounding. And if we don't work as a region, we don't have a very good place to live.
As municipalities struggle to come together in regional planning, citizens are involved in a deep conflict over how to value land. This struggle calls into question the original system of land management established in Arizona and in 22 other western states. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, the federal government granted it large parcels of land with the understanding that they would be sold to fund education. At the time, state trust lands were a visionary idea that guaranteed a future source of income for public schools. Now, many view this idea as a problem in need of change.
A lot of people see it as an opportunity to do something different. They believe that the public can change its mind, say, hey, Yeah, that was set aside for the schools in the past, back in 1912, but today we want something different. Let's change our minds.
Today, there are new funding sources for schools. In fact, less than 2% of the educational budget comes from the sale of state trust lands. For many, saving the remaining desert is more important than selling it off for profit.
Much of the growth is going to occur on land that's owned by the state. And much of that land that's owned by the state is still native desert. And so there's a significant amount of that land, and because it is still native desert, it has higher market value. People want to live in houses around native desert. So it's a real dilemma, because the land that has the highest value for its financial value is also the land that has the highest conservation values.
Land has long been viewed as a commodity, something for sale, basically dirt to be developed. This notion is being challenged by those who value land for what it is, not just what it could be developed into. This is an incredibly contentious issue. It pits educators against environmentalists, environmentalists against developers, developers against educators. And nobody is happy with the result.
And every piece of state land becomes a complete battleground over people who think it all ought to be preserved, over the land department trying to absolutely maximize its revenue.
We look at those lands as an income stream to fund schools. Do we have to see it developed? No. Do we have to see it used for any particular purpose? No. But we do have to get the money out of it.
So instead of taking this land that is this incredible asset that ought to be a laboratory for the best development practices and the most exciting things and how to balance growth and the environment to produce the best kind of place to live, it's just a football that we fight over all the time.
Pursuant to Title 37 ARS.
In order to reform state trust land, we need some real leadership, whether that comes from elected officials or from stakeholders sitting down together in a collaborative way, working things out. We need some leadership that recognizes the current system is dysfunctional and that we can do better.
The location of the trust lands today, in terms of what's left for being managed, are right in the path of development. And how they are dealt with by the land department will, in some very large measure, dictate the quality of the life in the community.
The value of the trust lands is equivalent to California's coastlines or Oregon's trees, or, they're our treasure, really.
Environmentalists and educators aren't the only ones struggling to shape the future of Phoenix. Another community with strong ties to the land has become a prominent player in the region's evolution: Native Americans. Once relegated to reservations far beyond the outskirts of the city, Native American communities now find themselves bordered by expanding suburbs. Their land, initially thought to have little value, stands directly in the path of high-stakes development.
The contrasting world around our reservation does not understand the true Pima Maricopa traditional customs and the appreciation of Mother Earth. That's what the Indian thinks about. When they come here, they'll destroy my historical sites. They will destroy the Red Mountain. That's the fear of development.
We became wards of the government at one time, and we just kind of lost any hope of and putting any trust in anybody that comes to us and says, "Have I got a deal for you?" We are hesitant, but today we're beginning to realize that that if we don't decide to do something, then somebody else or time will decide for us.
For many Native Americans, the time has come to take their future into their own hands. But what does that mean? Should they develop the land for maximum short-term profit? Or should they take a longer view and preserve open space for future generations? One of the most valuable areas they control is the Pima Corridor, an 8-mile-long swath on the eastern border of Scottsdale. Worth hundreds of millions of dollars, they have already begun development, leasing land for a huge shopping mall next to the interstate that runs through the reservation.
maybe we could fill that whole Pima corridor in the next 10, 20 years. Or we could take our time. And the concept has always been, don't take more than you need. Take what you need as you need it and work with it, and so that you have something for the future.
Life on the reservation has gotten better. Income from casinos has been used to provide jobs and build new schools.
I know that a lot of you see the facilities here in the community, but you don't really know what services are offered.
Our goal is to provide an environment where we can raise our children to become the productive people that we want. And it isn't going to change overnight. It's going to take about 2 or 3 generations. Most of the money that's coming in is for the improvement of the community, and we've got a long way to go.
It's a sense of obligation to the future generations that says the only thing we have is land. If we get rid of that, we have nothing. I think if that's what they're thinking, I think they're dead right.
Development wealth may help overcome the ills of past economic injustices, but it remains to be seen how a different cultural perspective will guide development decisions. Will the Native American community find a different way to plan for the future? Or will they make the same decisions that produce problems elsewhere? Not all growing pains happen out on the fringe of Phoenix. Some of the harshest problems have occurred in urban neighborhoods, vulnerable communities that suffer the loss of economic vitality when residents choose to move out. The American dream. 60 years ago, this was it. A vibrant neighborhood right next to downtown. But as Phoenix sprawled outward, the city's money and energy went into developing the fringe. As new neighborhoods, new schools, roads, shopping centers sprang up in the desert, this neighborhood was left behind, neglected. Growth tends to push people away from one another, isolating them by ethnicity, wealth, and poverty. In Phoenix, suburban growth meant downtown deterioration. By 1980, the city center was shabby and deserted. The decline alarmed the city's businesses and institutions. So they initiated a revitalization program, building civic centers and ballparks downtown. But it didn't reach South Phoenix.
We could see that the rest of Phoenix was being built up, money was being put in the other parts of town, so we wanted to know why couldn't some of it be put in our part of town.
The common wisdom among developers in Phoenix is that there's more money to be made building on the edge of the desert than there is redeveloping communities in the urban core, particularly those populated by minorities and the poor. Some would say it's the way the market works, or doesn't work.
Well, who's driving the market? I'm certainly not driving the market. Who has a greater ability to drive the market? I think those in government power and also the developers.
Nobody wanted to develop in this area. When the city of Phoenix declared as a developing neighborhood, a development area, and develop and implement an infill program to entice contractors to come down here to build, within this area, this neighborhood took off.
Citizens banded together to form grassroots neighborhood alliances. They pressured elected officials and city planners to provide the incentives necessary to get their needs noticed and funded.
And that became the dream and the goals of the community, was to at least turn one street and develop one street, make it an example for the rest of the streets. I was one of the first home buyers associated with Dream Street. And for me, to own a home was definitely in my dreams.
It was a dream that was set out to prove to people that, hey, you can live just as good in South Phoenix as you can in Scottsdale. You may not have the expensive home that they have in Scottsdale, but you can have a home you can be proud of.
This community has said, hey, look, we want to be a part of this growth. We want some positive stuff over here. We want to revitalize our community. How could you help us, you know?
The best thing that a neighborhood can do to get their ideas, their concerns, their issues on the table is that they have to organize. There has to be a body. There has to be a unified voice. There has to be the crowd. And many of them, believe it, have been very effective in the city of Phoenix.
Yeah, we were just talking about the area here, man, how it's really changed.
Several miles away in the neighborhood of Garfield, people did just that. They spoke with a unified voice. This was once a prosperous area, but as in the case of many American cities, people moved out and crime moved in.
So I was in the kitchen making tortillas, because I'm a very old-fashioned person. I still make my own tortillas. And I heard shooting again. And I go, oh my God, those darn druggies again, they're shooting. One of these days they're gonna kill me. So I went and got on the phone and I called the detective that I had been working with to come and clean up all those drugs. They had just started the law enforcement group. And I went and they asked us what our concerns were. And I sat there and I talked to them and they listened to me. And I thought, wow, this is strange. A police officer listening to me instead of me listening to a police officer. But they really were really concerned of what was going on. So that's how I got involved.
And I know that we have been getting new drug houses into the area. Garfield has always been a unique neighborhood.
Helen's spirit was contagious. Others from the neighborhood began showing up at community meetings, voicing their concerns, looking for police protection from gangs, drugs, and violence.
Police, it always helps.
Soon, city planners joined residents in reshaping a neighborhood that had been allowed to fall into disrepair. Both Garfield and Dream Street had been left behind, their deterioration the flip side of Phoenix's remarkable growth. But strong voices from the community helped these neighborhoods recover their identities, revitalize their sense of place.
Up here is the point of contention here, because there's some pretty cruddy zoning up there, or planning, okay?
A community is not just a plot of land defined by boundaries or lines on a map. It is a collection of citizens focused on realizing common goals.
I'm constantly shocked at how little understanding people have of how things get built. People will always say, well, they decided to build over there. Well, you know, who is they? They is this process. They is all of us. They is the guy who owns the property. They is the architect and the citizen committees that reviewed his plans. And at the end of that whole process, something comes out at the other end.
Most big cities I know are trying to continue to grow. They're struggling all with the same issues we are. It's how do you sustain that quality of life? How do you establish the quality of life in a way that makes it attractive for people to come?
Some solutions to these issues are found in the planning process. But what if planning started right at the beginning? Suppose a planning process defined the way a place is created before land becomes real estate.
Most of the development has been on the grid, out on the valley floor. And as it moves up into these desert areas, they're just repeating that. They're just plopping development down in the desert, again on the grid. It's very rigid, and you end up with the subdivision walled off, in effect, from the desert beyond.
24 miles north of downtown, but still within the city limits, is land that will eventually explode with development. Much of it is state trust land. If Phoenix followed the usual process, roads would be laid out, homes constructed, and whatever land happened to be left over would become open space. Citizens and planners instead reversed this process by identifying and buying open space in advance of impending development. They studied a 110 square mile area in North Phoenix and created a plan to set aside a third of it as open space.
What we're doing now is trying to buy lands for our Sonoran Preserve, the hillsides, the washes, the transition lands between those two, so we can create a mosaic of landscape for preservation, and then have the urban forum respond to that.
The Sonoran Preserve Master Plan saves flatlands and stream beds, the lifeblood of the desert, in addition to what was traditionally saved, the hillsides and mountaintops.
We're really trying to create a new kind of urban form in this area where the preserve is here first, and then we build a desert city instead of just a city in the desert.
Well, today is our turn for our legacy, for this generation. We're doing something for future generations, and frankly, a little something for ourselves, which is giving the voters a choice to purchase 15,000 acres of desert and protect it for all time.
A referendum was put before citizens. 80% voted to increase their own sales tax to raise funds to buy land for open space. Implementation of the plan has begun.
Here are 5 words you'll never hear. We should have developed that, because the truth is we didn't and we shouldn't, and we owe a debt of gratitude to those 20 and 50 years before us who stood up and fought the good fight.
This area won't be developing for the next 20 years perhaps, but we're already planning the preserves and the interface of the neighborhoods that aren't here yet with the hope of making that desert community instead of just repeating the pattern development.
If I had a magic wand, that would be an entire region with an open space network that was designed as carefully as the sewer system or the street system or any building. It would be a connective tissue. It wouldn't just be that we bought this chunk or we bought that chunk or somebody hadn't used this piece of land. We would design it.
1 million more people will call Phoenix their home in the next decade. What will they find? They'll find a place where some of their neighbors are engaged in the ongoing struggle to make place make sense.
If you had to write a book on how to just piss off the citizenry, how to disenfranchise them, look at the history of Pinnacle Peak. It's exactly what you do. You promise year after year after year we're going to do something, and then you don't do it.
Pinnacle Peak is an example of the power of place, of people willing to work, persist, and eventually prevail on behalf of a larger community interest of simply enjoying open land. For years, the landmark peak stood beyond the edge of the city, a place open for all to visit and climb. Eventually, development reached the area.
Everyone knew where Pinnacle Peak was. When you were in Phoenix, the whole valley area, you could look north and see this big prominent granite spire. This was state trust land, so it was owned by the state. They sell it off to the highest bidder, but we convinced them that this was a special place. The peak was special. And so in their agreement when they decided to sell it was that whoever bought it would have to donate 180 acres to the city of Scottsdale for a park to keep it public. Seemed like a straightforward deal. It was in writing. And then when it finally sold, one of the first things the developer said was, "I'm not giving that land up. I want it. It's mine."
The developer installed a fence, making the peak inaccessible to the general public. 2 new gated developments encircled the mountain. Their residents worried that visitors to Pinnacle Peak would violate their privacy.
So many people want to move here, and it's so easy to make short-term profits and have a myopic vision about growth and development. And preservation and open space is about a long-term vision. It's about looking ahead generations.
We kept showing up at meetings. We kept writing letters and emails and showing up at city council meetings and just pestering them, and that took 7 years to straighten out.
A compromise was reached. The peak was reopened to the public. Access would be limited to the daytime.
Good morning. This is a good morning. I don't have to tell any of you that this wasn't easy. I want to make a very important point. This is just terrific for us to have this natural amenity in our city and to have the opportunity for us to enjoy it forever. But keep in mind that this is only one piece, really one part of our open space preserve effort.
But you have to get in there with your passion, your emotions, and your energy and just fight for it. Everything in this country that's worth anything, people have had to fight for at one time or another. And yeah, if I had my druthers, I'd rather not have to sit here and go to boring meetings after meeting after meeting and write millions of letters. But that's what you got to do sometimes. anytime you put 7 years into something and it finally does work, it's fantastic. And there's no way I can verbalize that so you'd understand it. But I am one happy camper right now.
This land of possibility and growth, this valley of the sun, is a place where many more people will choose to pursue the American dream. But imagine this desert sustaining an urban complex of 10 million people, or 15 million. Will it evolve into an endless grid of asphalt office parks, shopping centers, and housing developments? Before the people of Greater Phoenix can answer this question, they, like so many other citizens, must resolve a paradox in the American dream. Our desire to build the home of our dreams often puts at risk the very place we call home.
And I think this is a very basic problem in the United States, is the commitment to how much of what I'm doing is in the community's interest and how much of what I'm doing is in my self-interest, and how do we make those a win-win situation?
How does place get made? It gets made through this dialectical process between the sense of the larger community need and the sense of the individual right. And I think this is a wonderful laboratory to see those processes working and making sense of them, understanding them. And then, of course, ultimately, if you understand them, maybe you can actually massage them a little. Maybe you can actually make them work for you.